Yiddish as a Living Language by Ross Bradshaw. Der Tate viert mir voor a hand in Schul, der Tag is Vrijmorgendik Zunik, der Tag is Yom Tov. Thus starts one of my favourite Yiddish poems by H. Levick. My father leads me by the hand to Shul, synagogue. Today is early, a sunny morning. Today is Yom Tov, holiday. Never mind that holiday doesn't quite work for Yom Tov. The poem is a nostalgic look back to the old country, to their home. The marketplace and all of the shops are closed. Today, Father is gentle, like Yom Tov. They are watched over by God. It's Pesach, that's Passover. Father walks and the child narrator dances along, his small hand in the hand of his father. Ich bin alt gewen 5 Jahr, und der Tate is gewen ewig. I was 5-year-old. My father was eternity. Never mind that Levick's own family background was not happy, and that for many years he was a communist despite his religious background. He writes about a world that is gone. Gone, but not quite vanished. In Lithuania, that's Lite in Yiddish, I've been in villages where the shops and markets were once Jewish, and where some of the houses round the former market areas still bore traces of mezuzahs, small containers carrying religious texts, on their doorposts. The language that he wrote in, Yiddish, is that also gone, but not quite vanished? A few years ago, for my own amusement, I listed a number of words in relatively common use in British English that were Yiddish in origin, including chutzpah, schlepp, klutz, and nosh, amongst others. Had I used American English, the list would have been much longer. Indeed, most of the Yiddish words in British English probably came over from the USA. This reflects both the number of Jews in the United States compared to the UK and their influence on public life, popular culture, and speech in each country. And by Jews, here I mean Jews of Central and East European descent, the Ashkenazim, whose historical language, Yiddish, was roughly speaking a blend of medieval German, Hebrew, and Slavic languages. The language stories of Sephardi Jews, those who came originally from Spain and Portugal, and Mizrahi Jews, those who came from other countries of the Middle East and North Africa, they're all distinctly different. There are many Jewish languages. In the USA, there were many writers whose lives were formed by their Yiddish-speaking family background, and whose work reflected this. Philip Roth, Bernard Malamud, Saul Bellow, for example. More recently, there's Michael Chabon's the wonderful The Yiddish Policemen's Union, which imagines a Yiddish-speaking state. Here in Britain, we have, well, save for Howard Jacobson's Kaluki Nights, few contemporary British Jewish novels that reflect the language of those who spoke Yiddish in their home, at work, and in Jacobson's case, down the market. Yiddish was once spoken by 10 or 11 million Jews and a sprinkling of others. The late US General Colin Powell, who as a teenager worked in Jewish stores in the Bronx when he was young, was proud of his basic Yiddish. The Arab boatmen of Haifa could get by in the language that the State of Israel would itself soon downgrade in favour of Hebrew. And somewhere in my files, I have an image of an apparently non-Jewish boy in Birobidzhan reading Yiddish. Birobidzhan was a 1930s Stalin-sponsored colonization project on the Russian-Chinese border to which Soviet Jews were encouraged to migrate and where Yiddish was, at least then, officially approved. But then the Holocaust, Churban in Yiddish, wiped out a few million speakers. Stalin also played a part, closing down Jewish organizations, Yiddish-speaking organizations, and finally executing the leaders of the Soviet Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee on 12th of August 1952, an event that's sometimes called the Night of the Murdered Poets, although not everyone was a poet. Even Birobidzhan saw mass purges. Moreover, there was linguistic assimilation to Hebrew, to English, and to the other languages in places where East European Jews ended up. Native speakers, once established in their new countries for a generation or two, rarely passed the language on. Indeed, some Jewish schools actively discouraged Yiddish, including in Britain. In London, there was at one time 4 Yiddish daily newspapers, the last, Die Zeit, closing in 1950. There was a vibrant publishing scene which faded away as Jews took the Northwest Passage away from the East End. Avram Stenzel, a poet and publisher, used to sell his literary magazine Lotion and Leben, Language and Life, outside Jewish meetings. Kauft a Heft, buy a copy. Buy a journal, he would say. Kauft a Heft. And he did sell copies, but towards the end it was largely to people who could not read the magazine he was selling, who were buying it for charity. In the former Yiddish-speaking heartland of London's Jewish East End, the Friends of Yiddish group kept going for decades, though, first under Stenzel, then Meyer Bogdansky, and finally Chaim Neslin. The Friends included a number of the last fluent native speakers of Yiddish living in the East End, and a sprinkling of learners. Its meetings at Toynbee Hall in Whitechapel folded in 2011. Thanks to David Katz, Gennady Estreich, and others, Yiddish speaking thrived for a period at the Oxford Institute for Yiddish Studies summer schools. The Ukrainian-born Estreich now teaches in the US, and the American-born Katz largely in Lithuania. Katz's book, Words on Fire, The Unfinished Story of Yiddish, came out in 2004, while Estreich, a former managing editor of the Yiddish literary journal Sowjetisch Heimland, has written widely on Soviet-era Yiddish literature and culture. A continuous secular Yiddish life has lasted longer in the USA, but the social democratic newspaper Forward, that's Vorwärts, once selling 250,000 copies daily, moved largely to English in the 1990s. The anarchist Freie Arbeiterstimme, Free Workers' Voice, went to the great utopia in the sky in 1977, and the communist Morgen Freiheit, Morning Freedom, winked out of life in 1988. It's interesting that these long-lasting papers were all left-leaning. And yet, at the same time, the number of native speakers was actually growing among communities of the strictly Orthodox Haredi and Hasidic Jews. They still tend to have large families, their own newspapers, an internal life mostly conducted in Yiddish, and an active publishing industry specifically for their own members. As anyone with a flair for language could work out from watching the TV series Unorthodox, or the drama series Stiesel, the Hasidim per trade have their own dialect. These were adherents of the Satmar sect, which largely separates itself from the secular community. In Boy Chicks in the Hood, Robert Eisenberg remarked that by 2050 there will be more Yiddish speakers alive than at any time previously. It's just that they won't have any relationship to the non-Haredi world, nor will they read the secular books. All that wealth of material from 150 years of Yiddish literature. Yiddish books will be thrown away. Who will be there to read them? What to do with these old books? Over in America, the National Yiddish Book Center, now called the Yiddish Book Center, was set up to save these books. The story is told by the founder, Aaron Lansky, in Outwitting History. The center collects Yiddish books, and its digitalization program, with a target of 70,000 published volumes, means that eventually the entire corpus of Yiddish publishing could be online. You can already download over 11,000 titles free from their website. So we have the literature, but who can read it in what Jeffrey Chandler, in his recent book Yiddish Biography of a Language, calls this post-vernacular time? Beyond the Haredi world, there are few groupings of native speakers or families where Yiddish is passed from generation to generation. One exception is the Melbourne Bund. The Bund was the main Jewish socialist organization in pre-war Poland and elsewhere in Eastern Europe. The group just about survived in Poland and then in exile in Golis, but faded as the members of the war years died out. In Melbourne, however, it survives and thrives, with a focus on Yiddish and political activism, and with an active youth group. The newest Yiddish magazine I'm aware of is Link, the Melbourne Bund's youth zine. In the USA, the Workers' Circle, Der Arbeiter Ring, continues teaching Yiddish and engaging in social justice campaigns. In Boston, its large intergenerational choir, Bessere Welt, has performed everywhere from conferences to picket lines, from temples to interfaith rallies. In France, meantime, the Maison de la Culture Yiddish, Bibliothèque Medem, organizes courses and its own full cultural program. But what is happening is that, increasingly internationally, a different sort of Yiddish speaker is emerging. Chandler, in his biography of Yiddish, describes how, for a number of Jews, Yiddish is a way to be Jewish without synagogues and without Israel at the center of Jewish life. Avi Blitz, a teacher of Yiddish, has described something similar going on within Israel. In Yiddish, nobody cares if you're from a religious background or whether you're gay or straight or even if you're not Yiddish. There are teachers of Yiddish in the UK who are not Jewish and quite a few klezmer musicians who are not. In the USA for a period, Yiddish was taught at the University of Texas by the Romany academic, Ian Hancock, whose London grandfather passed himself off as Jewish to work in the sheet music business when it was effectively a Jewish trade. Though my own Yiddish learning stalled due to pressures of work, nobody ever cared that I was not Jewish either. Jewish life in the UK is not solely focused on the world of religion of Israel. However, the new Yiddish world has its own distinctive identity and a certain tam, a taste or a feeling. In Britain, you can now access not only academic courses, but also a monthly Yiddish open mic cafe, an annual Yiddish summer school called Otazoe, run by the Jewish Music Institute, which is one of a group of European summer schools. And from this year, you can go to the first residential Sofwoch weekend, being held entirely in Yiddish. My own tiny part in Yiddish is in publishing, and gives some indication of where we are. One dual-language Yiddish-English book of poetry by Avram Stenzel, a reader in Yiddish film, a book on the paintings of Stanislav Bronstein, all sadly now out of print, but we have a book of translations from Soviet Yiddish writers, those torn from us by Stalin. It's called From Revolution to Repression, Soviet Yiddish Writing, 1917 to 1952. And we have a dual-language version of Michael Rosen's We're Going on a Bear Hunt, Mir gern auf a Bärenjagd. Closing a circle here, this book, the first children's book in Yiddish to be published in the UK for decades, is translated by Helen Beer, a native speaker from Melbourne who recently retired from University College London. The other week in the bookshop where I work, I heard a question I never thought I would hear. A customer picking up the Yiddish Bear Hunt and asking if we had any other Yiddish books or any books in Ladino for children. If you're looking for children's books in Yiddish, a good place to start is Sweden's Onlianski Text Verlag. If you want, say, Der Hobbit or Harry Potter und der Philosopher's Stein, as well as original stories. Unfortunately, most people who might have an interest in Yiddish literature and stories can't read them. The Yiddish Book Centre recognises this, as does a number of American university presses, and translations are now coming out regularly. Academic teaching and research on Yiddish in the UK is based largely at the UCL, University College London, now under the direction of Professor Lily Kahn. Social and cultural historian and performer Vivi Lax has published 2 books, London Yiddish Town and Whitechapel Noise, while oral history broadcaster Alan Dean has compiled the CD Music is the Most Wonderful Language in the World on the London Yiddish jazz scene. Historian David Mazower, Londoner, now working at the Yiddish Book Centre in Amherst, Massachusetts, has done a great deal of work on the history of Yiddish theatre in Britain. These researchers and activists form only a part of the recovery of the London Yiddish past that will help the creation of a London Yiddish future. When Isaac Bashevis Singer accepted the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1978, he said, "Yiddish has not said its last word. It contains treasures that have not been revealed to the eyes of the world." Indeed, in April 2021, Duolingo introduced a Yiddish program. Secular Yiddish lives in the Argentinian Joyka Tsakis singing Yiddish tango, in the queer-run Pink Peacock Cafe in Glasgow, which is the first business in a generation to have its shop sign in Yiddish, in the music of the rock band The Klezmatics, and clever revivalists including Michael Albert, now living in Scotland, at Kles North, Klezmer in the Park, Kleskamp, in the political music of Daniel Kahn, in the Professor James Yiddish Punch and Judy show, at the art show Fegeles by Sterner Goldblum. Fegeles, little birds, is Yiddish slang for LGBT people. It lives in the banner of young Jews in Poland marching for women's rights and carrying a banner with slogans from the Bund. In the research on the Yiddish speakers who fought in the Spanish Civil War, at Plena Shepherd's, Yiddish choirs, and at online events. Even in the words of the editor of the Writer's Mosaic Guest Edition, who wrote that he was on Spilkes, on pins about it. I finished this article just after watching Paula Vogel's Indecent, a play which is about an early Yiddish play, Gott für Nakoma, God of Vengeance, by Sholem Asch. In Rebecca Teichmann's production, Yiddish is projected onto the backdrop, and Merlin Shepherd's klezmer band frames the work. What was interesting about the original 1907 play was that it featured a passionate relationship between 2 Jewish women, one a prostitute and the other the brothel owner's daughter. It played to packed audiences wherever Yiddish theatre was performed. Sexual transgression in Yiddish was never far away. In 1936, the musical comedy Yidel Mieten Fiedel, Yidel with his fiddle, had a cross-dressing main character, while Isaac Bashevis Singer's short story Yentl, in its original language, was replete with homoerotic longing. Yiddish, quoting Singer, is a language of exile, without a land, without frontiers, not supported by any government. Nor does it need any of these impediments. It seems to me also that it is a language that does not put itself above others, and that links Jews to other minority cultures. No surprise, then, that the slogan on the banner of the Polish Yiddish Naftali Botwin Brigade in the Spanish Civil War, the same banner carried by the young Jews in Poland today, reads, "Für Eir und unser Freiheit," for your freedom and ours.